Right now, executive burnout is a major issue. According to a Deloitte survey, nearly 70% of C-suite executives reported feeling burned out. 81% of those executives said improving their well-being was more important than their current salary. Welcome. Come on in. And join me as we get curious about asking, are we as leaders unintentionally fueling career burnout? Could the burnout problem fall on our lack of boundaries, professional boundaries, in how we have facilitated our talent pools accidentally stumbling from one part of their career to another career without really having any clear intention? Well, we're about to find out. Welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. Join the movement of deeply curious leaders by hitting the subscribe button right now. The Dov Baron Show is not just another podcast, it's your passport to unparalleled insights. Each episode is filled with wisdom of global leaders, scientists, entertainers, philosophers, theologians, and journalists, from astronauts who traveled the vastness of space to presidential candidates trying to make sense of the world on a brink. We dive into the most intriguing minds. For the next 2 episodes, our guests' insights will captivate and inspire you. Hit the subscribe button and become part of the global community today. Scott Jeffrey Miller is a prolific 7 times best-selling author and famous podcast host. He currently serves as Franklin Covey's senior advisor on thought leadership. Before his advisory role, Scott spent 25 years as a Franklin Covey associate, serving as chief of marketing and executive vice president. He hosts On Leadership with Scott Miller, the world's largest weekly leadership podcast. JDs and Lentilman, turn up the volume. Help me to welcome someone who is as kind and generous as he is wise, author of the brand new Career on Course. Take your career from accidental to intentional. Returning champion, Scott Jeffrey Miller.
Dov, if only my mother could have heard the introduction, because she to this day has no idea how I earn a living, unlike my brother, who is a chemical engineer and is a favorite child. If only she...
If only, huh? If only.
Thank you.
Good to see you, mate. I appreciate you being on. Always appreciate you being on, mate. It's always a joy to have you here. Listen, take your career from accidental to intentional. Why? What's the call to that? I just mentioned the statistics, but what caused you to write that?
Well, as I looked at careers around me in my own 35-year corporate career with the Walt Disney Company and Stephen Covey's leadership firm, the Franklin Covey Company, I realized that it was a commonality amongst most people's careers, is that, yes, there was a level of opportunity. Yes, there was a level of serendipity, but most people's careers weren't very intentional. People couldn't tell you what they were going to do 5 years from now or 2 roles from now. They didn't have a strategy. Now, I don't think all careers are linear. I think all careers have some level of serendipity, but I just felt really passionate around writing this book and marshaling my own experience. As you know, my successes and my failures. My career wasn't a straight trajectory. I just wanted to help people understand, how much serendipity should you have in your career? Don't use serendipity as a cover for sort of episodic accidentalism, if that's a word, but to become more intentional and take control of your career, and don't give it up to someone or some other group of people. Because the truth is, you're rarely in the office or in the room when your career is decided for you. Somebody else deciding your career for you. And I think that is truthfully accurate, but also repulsive.
I like that. So let's talk about that elephant in the room, which you talk about was this serendipity. I think that we tend to jump from pole to pole. What I mean by that is that some people are entirely serendipitous and I'm just going to let it happen and it will unfold as it may. And other people are rigidly trying to work out what their career is. You're not saying either. Is that correct?
What I'm saying is I don't think most people know what their strategy is. I think they wouldn't know if it was serendipitous. I don't think they would know if it was accidental. I think I'm going to use the word most a lot after, thousands of podcast interviews and 7 written in 30 years in this industry. I think most people are running from something as opposed to running to something. I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but I think it's accurate. I think as people become more intentional and more introspective and more deliberate about their career, then they become more in control. They're less at the whims of someone else or some industry downturn or a CFO who decides she needs to save $1 million. And so this group is going away. That's not to demonize the CMO. Their job is to make a profitable company. But I just see too many people who get acted upon, who don't have a plan. So therefore, they're part of someone else's plan. And those cliches were so seriously insightful to me, I wanted to write a book. Have a plan or be part of someone else's. Act or be acted upon. Recognize you're never in the room when your career is decided for you. So if you think that's true, which by the way it is, that the shades are turned, and the chart pad comes out, and the names for the next general manager are put up on the whiteboard, and they're crossed out based on whether someone likes you or doesn't like you, or the quarter that they're looking at your results does or doesn't match their narrative. Nonsense. Enough with that. Take control of your career. And I wrote this book, Career on Course, to teach 10 strategies to do just that, regardless of what level you're in your trajectory.
Let's look at that in the context of today's workforce, because you and I have talked about this before. The prevailing wisdom is to keep throwing promotions and money at the talent of today and not to expect people to stick around. This is important. Why would a leader watching, listening to us right now, a leader who is leading millennials and Gen Z talent, why would they read this? Why would they follow this? Because they feel like I just have to go along with this new form of how you keep people.
Yeah, I don't agree with the premise, but I think you're setting me up wise, as I know your interview style. I think the pendulum is swinging. Dov, I think for decades of your and my generation, you and I are roughly the same age, loyalty was a general value of most professionals. We stayed with companies. My dad worked at Lockheed Martin for 35 years. I worked at Franklin Covey 25 years. And then that pendulum swung, and maybe rightly so over the last 5 or 6 years, where now the average career is like 18 months. And I think it's swinging back. I think, although there is the creator economy, and there's so many options, the number of people getting their driver's license at 16 is at an all-time low. For you and I, it was a rite of passage. You and I were first in line on our birthdays to get our driver's license. People don't have cars anymore. They can Uber. But I do think the pendulum is swinging back a little bit to where people that are looking at their careers are realizing, wow, I've had like 7 leaders in 5 years. This is exhausting. I had to learn 5 cultures and 5 operating styles and 5 ways to approve expense reports and what's it like to work here and get stuff done. That's exhausting.
For sure.
I think there is a pendulum swing somewhere back in the middle. To your question, leaders, you need to recognize that you're going to have an individualized style of leadership, right? How Dodd wants to be led is different than how Scott wants to be led. You can't just take your style and spread it peanut butter style across everybody. It doesn't work that way. People will quit you. We know this adage is true, a cliche or not. People don't quit their jobs. They quit bad bosses and corrupt cultures. So one is, leaders, you need to constantly be re-recruiting your people. My experience in the leadership business is we spend so much time recruiting people and then not enough time retaining them.
So talk to us about that, because you just said something profound that I think most leaders are missing, which is re-recruiting the people who are already on board, because we tend to be looking out there for who's the next superstar we can hire, and oftentimes missing the people we've got until it's too late. And then we throw money at them or some promotion at them, and they're already dissatisfied.
Listen here. Every single one of your employees right now is being recruited by somebody. Every single one of them. They've gotten 4 or 5 LinkedIn inquiries this week from headhunters or your competition, because it's easier to pay them $10,000 more a year because you've already trained them and at them. And so you are naive if you don't think every one of your employers, including your C-suite, your bench strength of high performers, and even your lower performers, they're still being recruited. Now, maybe you want your low performers to be recruited, but the point is, there is always going to be a war on talent. If you're introspective, you're probably in some kind of negotiation or conversation at any given time that you're being recruited. Everybody now is always in a conversation for what's next. Therefore, when you recognize that, you can't be held hostage by that. That's not possible. You have to create a culture where people choose to stay, where they say, yeah, thank you for your inquiry. I'm flattered, but no, thank you. I'm very happy here right now because my leader loves me. My leader cares about me. I'm valued here. Not just they paid me more money, but I have a voice. I'm respected. They're coaching me. They're mentoring me. I am growing. This is called re-recruitment. And I think, like all of us in our marriages with our children, we don't do enough to re-recruit our spouse. I mean, just because you got married in a church doesn't mean that stuff doesn't go sideways. You've got to be re-recruiting people as your friends. That means you've got to make it safe for them to give you feedback. You have to make it safe to give them feedback. You have to make sure you know what is their love language. One of my favorite books ever published is Gary Chapman's The 5 Love Languages. And although it's a personal book, he wrote a professional version. You should know what your employees' love language is. Is it validation? Is it rewards? Is it finance? Is it promotion? Is it gratitude? Is it recognition? It's different for everybody. This is a no-brainer. Your time needs to be also recruiting as well as re-recruiting. And you got to ask yourself, how much time have I spent this week making sure that my top performers are inoculated against the constant overtures they're going to get from headhunters in the other industry? Happening more than you think it is.
The other side of that, though, Scott, is that the employee has gone to the mindset of, I should be listening to all these options. I should be taking all these options. I should be jumping careers every 20 minutes. When you and I entered the workforce, we were asked, what do you want to do? That was a 40-year question. Today, it's a 4-year question at most for a career, not for a job. A job is 1.2 years. You've just spoken to the leaders about re-recruiting. Now let's talk to the employees who are potentially listening to this and going, yeah, but I got a great offer. And yeah, these people are good and I like them and I like working here, but I got a better offer somewhere else. Because you're talking about being really intentional rather than accidental.
Yeah, I love this question. I'm going to answer it on 2 sides. First, the number 1 strategy in my book, literally the first of 10 strategies, is know your professional value.
Right.
Everyone listen up. You need to create 2 lists of values or 2 segments of 1 values. You want to have articulated your personal values. Every one of your subscribers needs to sit down over the course of a couple of days or weeks and write down what your personal values are. Most of us would probably, when asked, we might say, oh, patriotism, freedom, agility. Yeah, great. Next cocktail party. Now what are your values? Something else. You need to take the time to write down and prioritize your value. Like I did 15 years ago when asked about my values, I couldn't actually tell you what they were. And now I know they are purpose, health, integrity, loyalty, positivity, and abundance. PHILPAL. Phil Pal. And my entire life is lived in alignment with these 7 personal values. I also have 3 professional values. My number 1 professional value is maximize my income. And I communicate it unabashedly to anybody who asks. Number 2 professional value is to work with and for a brand that I respect, the Walt Disney Company and the Franklin Covey Company. My number 3 brand is to work with and for people I love and respect. I could have earned a lot more money if my number 1 value was simply maximize income and there was no second value. I could have worked for some firm I didn't respect and made a lot more money, but I did have a second value, which was to be proud of my association. Yes. My point is to all of your listeners, you need to write down what your professional values are. And don't write them because they sound impressive or somebody else might care. Dov, I don't give a flying flip what you think about my personal professional values. We're friends. I would come and give you a kidney next week if I was the match. I like you, but I don't care what you think about my values. They're my values. And therefore, your listeners should write theirs down and get clear on it. Because if your number 1 value is learning and you're in an organization that invests in that, this might be the best place for you to stay for 8, 10 years. If your number 1 value is to see the world, maybe you work for Procter & Gamble or Google or some major company that has 70 offices around the world. But you don't know if it's the right employer unless you've written down your values and now can make judgment calls. And sometimes those values are in conflict. Sometimes your personal values and your professional values aren't in alignment. And that's fine. That's not always bad because our values are based on our roles. My values changed when I got married, when I became a father, when my mother needed for me to shift my own priorities and start to care for her in her 80s. My values change as my roles change. So to the people that are listening that are employees, don't do anything until you've written down your values and you've taken time to really think about them. And then you decide, is this new opportunity in support of my values, where I am in my life right now? And then you can make a decision whether it's at a location you want to be or with more people, or you want it to be a virtual job, or it's a better title, or it's a better, you get the point. The book really is about thinking of your career in terms of decades, 20, 30, 40 years, not 1 or 2 months or 1 or 2 years. It's a big, bold idea and maybe too bold for some people. But if you want to become more deliberate with your career, you'll make all your decisions in alignment with your values. And you can't do that until you've identified them and written them down.
I think that's such a great point and such an important point, because I know for sure that most people, I know, well, because I do this all the time, I'll ask people their values, and usually it's something contrived that they'll make up on the spot because it's supposed to impress. And they'll say things like family. And I'm going to do it right now so you can have this, because what Scott just gave you is really vitally important, is you got to work on your values. But if you're going to work on your values, you got to know what those values are. Now, what I mean by that is, let's say you say, my number one value is family. I'm going to ask you why. And you're going to go, because it is. And I'll go, no, why is it? And the answer is likely because you were supposed to say that. But if you go past that, why is it important? And it doesn't mean that family isn't your highest value, but it means you've got to know what is the why. And I will suggest to you, because this is what I do in my work with clients, is I'll push you 3, 4, 5 levels deeper. So you say family, I say, why? Well, I was brought up to think it's family. Why? Why were you brought up that way? Well, because family's always been important to us. Well, yeah, family's been important to everybody because it wouldn't exist if we didn't have a family. But why is it important to you? And take that deeper level, because then when you're overlaying that, and I think this is what Scott is saying, is when you overlay that with where am I going in my life? And is it in alignment with that? Because one thing I'll tell you, my wife and I had this discussion with a young man we met recently, which is one thing that is going to guarantee your level of misery or your level of joy is picking the right person for who you partner with. If you've been married for any period of time, you know that for sure. I'm very blessed. I'm with the woman of my dreams, but I had a lot of mismatches before. And because I had to get my relational values very clear. And Scott talked about having professional values. You've got to get those things really clear, because if they're not clear in each of the segments, you'll be in some kind of an accidental process rather than a very conscious process of this is where I'm going. So if that's true, if you think about that, like your happiness is going to be depending on whether you're clear about the right person. Somebody comes along with the right nice face or personality or whatever it is, that's going to change over time. You've got to know what the values are underneath that. Well, it's the same with the career. Things are going to change over time. You've got to know what it is that you really want. So I think that's such a great first, most important piece, Scott. Thank you for that. I think it really sort of sends the message home.
My pleasure. As I have posted about this on social, all the values experts have come out of the woodwork. Oh, you can't have 2 sets of values. And I said, that's semantics. I actually think you can, and especially in America, where a lot of people's identities, especially those who are single, are based on their career. I was married at 41. So for right or wrong, good or bad, my identity was very much my career. Cool. I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this, but up until I was married and had a family, I would probably work into the conversation with you somehow my title, what I did for a living, the company I worked for, my compensation, my 401. I mean, I would work it in because that's who I was. And I'm not ashamed of it. It's who I was when I was single. But now, as my roles have changed, my identity has changed, so have my professional values. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I am married. My wife is a full-time stay-at-home mom and manager of all of our finances and our 3 sons. I'm the provider. I'm the sole financial provider for 4 people, plus myself, 5. So I take my role as provider with extraordinary gravity and seriousness, which is why my number 1 value is to maximize my income, not at the expense of my reputation or my relationships or my brand, but I make it very clear that I work for a living. If I didn't have to work, I would go garden, play tennis, ride my mountain bike, lift weights, go to lunch with my wife, and breakfast and dinner. I have to work because my kids want braces as a parent. They want to go to college. They want to play tennis. You get it. Everybody can relate to that at some point. Once you have your personal professional values clear, it's like a parting of the seas on should you take this job offer or not? Should you be promoted? Should you leave? You'd be amazed how much clarity you'll provide to yourself.
Again, in all areas, I think you're right, it's probably semantics, because I don't see it as separate things. I see it as filtered through the lens of, I don't call them values, I call them maxims because they're deeper. When I go to my maxims and I look at those things, my maxims around my relationship or around my career or around any area of my life are just deeper in a context of this maxim applies in the context of relationship, in the context of parenting, in the context of being a boss, in the context of being an entrepreneur, whatever it is, but it's still got the same roots. And I think it's such an important piece because what Scott just said is it's going to give you clarity. It's going to make your life easier. So it may sound a little like overwhelming to sit down and actually do that, but you need somebody to help you, but you do need to do it.
And I'd take it 30 seconds longer. As your listeners know, I was the chief marketing officer for the Franklin Covey company and worked here for 25 years. I was once at a conference when I was single, and Stephen Covey, our founder, the author of the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, came on stage and encouraged everybody to write their personal mission statement. Franklin Covey is known for personal mission statements. I'm 35 years old, and I'm thinking, I have no idea what my mission is. I don't know. Go to Italy 4 times this year? Drink more champagne? Buy my second mountain bike? I don't know. I don't have a mission. Who knows? I was the chief marketing officer. It totally did not resonate with me. And then our other founder, Hiram Smith, came on, who was the inventor of the Franklin Planner. Everybody had a Franklin Planner in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. Hiram Smith came on, his business partner, and talked about the power of identifying your personal values. And I thought, wow, that really resonates. I have no idea what my values are. That was the impetus between the mission statement part and the values part. That's how I got clear. I need to resonate. I need to focus on my values. Thanks for letting me put a pen in that.
Thank you. At the beginning of the intro to the show, I said, is it our fault? I asked, we as leaders, are we responsible? Is it our lack of boundaries that have caused this problem of this burnout that is having people bounce around from career to career? Do you see it as our responsibility? Do you see part of it as our responsibility?
Like most things in life, I don't know that it's black and white, but I think you're asking the right question because I can relate to this. I would say the following. What is your identity based on? Stedman Graham, who's a good friend of mine, a prolific author. Most people know Stedman as a very prolific entrepreneur and Oprah Winfrey's life partner. He says most of us are living an identity that someone else chose for us. Our parents, our caregivers, and we're just kind of mirroring what a lot of our parents did. Guilty as charged. For the first 20 years of my profession, my identity was that of my career, and so I worked nonstop. I'm not sure I was a workaholic. I played tennis and I vacationed and had friends, but I certainly worked my point to burnout.
Yes.
And the company took advantage of that, exploited it. Not disingenuously. I didn't have 4 kids like everybody else in the company, so I would move everywhere and do everything and pick up the slack. And by the way, it helped my career. My 401k and the other things in life, were resulting, but there's no question it burned me out. I became probably toxic at times, right? At short temper. I probably said and did things that were put into my human resource file because I lacked self-regulation and I thought everybody should be working as hard as I did. Therefore, I came to resent them. I came to be jealous of them. I'm sure I subconsciously punished some people because I viewed that they weren't working as hard as me. I've probably answered your question. I think a lot of us having lack of boundaries has worked ourselves into a bit of victimhood and martyrdom. And that takes a really mature, self-aware person to use those words to describe yourself. That's what happened to me. I'll tell you, on that point, I also thought that boundaries was a naughty word 3 or 4 years ago. Everybody who I thought had boundaries was, well, they wouldn't do this and they wouldn't do that and they won't take a call on Sundays and they have all these boundaries. And I thought people had boundaries were lazy. I equated boundaries with what you won't do, why you aren't a hard worker, why I can't depend upon you. As I look back at the totality, I think there is a healthy perspective of what kind of boundaries. I have a person that works for me. I was the chief marketing officer. I was a named executive officer in a public company. I had a 20-year-old person where I might text him maybe like once every 2 months on the weekend. Not every weekend, like once every 2 months on a Saturday. Hey, I've got a call with the CEO this afternoon. Can you remind me about something? And he would write back, I don't work on Saturdays. Just wait till Monday. And I'm thinking, okay, I just texted you once in a month on the weekend. I just wanted the name of something. I told you I had a call with the CEO and you're telling me, can I wait till Monday? No, the call's in an hour. I didn't call you at midnight last night. I didn't send you emails at 3 a.m. I didn't call you on your honeymoon. Those kind of boundaries to me, I think are ridiculous. At the same time, I think my entire career has been boundaryless. And therefore I burnt myself out. I thought I'm the classic pendulum, right? If you have boundaries, you're lazy. And if you don't, you're successful. And I think it's all about finding that calibration that works for the kind of brand, the kind of reputation, the kind of life, the kind of renewal, the kind of longevity we want in our careers. And I'm learning this the hard way.
I think that boundaries is a very important piece, and I want to make a distinction here because I think that people don't understand. Boundaries are not rules, and rules are not boundaries. Rules are black holes for joy. Boundaries are very different. So rules are about other people. Boundaries are about you. So I remember sitting down with my mom and saying something to her, and she was upset. And I said, listen, it's just my boundary. And she said, well, you don't need boundaries with me. I'm your mother. Well, guess what? You're my mother. I need boundaries with you more than anybody. But the point was, I said to her, you think this is a boundary to do with you. It's got nothing to do with you. This is my boundary. I have the same boundary with my wife, with my friends, with everybody. It's not separate for anybody. And this is my boundary for taking care of me, taking care of my soul, taking care of what's important at a soulful level to me. And I think that oftentimes we have these rules and we want to put them on other people. That's not a boundary. But as leaders, when we're looking at people, we've got to find out what are the real boundaries for this person. Because a lot of the time when somebody's desperate for work, they'll throw all their boundaries away. And on the other side, when they're in these positions where they're being offered a new job every 20 minutes or a new career every 20 minutes, they feel like they can throw all this stuff at you. Again, as the leader, we have to stop and we have to say, where's my boundary? Because you look like a fantastic candidate, but I am not interested in this attitude, or I'm not interested in this way of being. And if you want to show up in a dress with a beard, fine. But if you want to show up and have an attitude with people who you're trying to serve, that's not going to work, even though you are spectacular at doing the job. And so I think this is really important for we as leaders have to get clear on, again, as you said, the boundaries, but also the values, because boundaries have to be in line with the values. So the boundaries hold the values in place. So they're not just things you make up. That's why I said if you ask somebody their values and they just sprout them out, it doesn't really work. Because they've got to know what are the boundaries I have in place to hold me accountable to my values. That's what the boundaries are. So it's a really great point. Thank you so much, Scott.
You made it, not me. I just gave you fodder for how I was representing the fact that my lack of boundaries, I'm sure, contributed to my own burnout, and probably not to my implosion, because I didn't implode, but I stepped down from being the CMO. I wasn't asked to leave. I stepped down. Quite frankly, I was burnt out for lots of reasons. I'd been burnt out. I'd burned myself out. My brand was starting to be tarnished because I'd become a little bit of a know-it-all, and I was short with people. I had just been burnt out. I love your definition. Boundaries are about me. Rules are about you. Great distinction.
So we're already at the end of part 1 of the show. We're going to come to part 2 in just a moment, and we'll continue on our delicious conversation with Scott, and we'll really look at what the most important skill for you to have if you're going to be intentional about your career. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at some more of these 10. Remember, values was number 1. We're going to look at more of those as we move on. But before we do that, Scott, I'd love for you to tell people where they can find out more about you, about this brand new book, and all of the wonderful resources you have, because I know you have a lot. And by the way, the guy has an amazing podcast. I've been very honored to be on there. It's a spectacular show, and that's no wonder it's the number 1 leadership show in the world. Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you, sir. The book is my 7th. It's called Career on Course, 10 Strategies to Take Your Career from Accidental to Intentional. It's anywhere and everywhere books are sold, on audio, digital, and in print. My website is scottjeffreymiller.com. You can find me, to my wife's horror, on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok. I'm there. I'm on TikTok every day. I tape a 1-minute video on TikTok every morning. Yeah, not dancing, just preaching, so to speak. And so if you Google me, Scott Jeffrey Miller, I'm bound to show up somewhere in your feed.
Excellent. And of course, we'll make sure that all those links are published in the show notes.
Especially TikTok.
Especially TikTok. We're going to make sure that was that. I'm curious to go on and find out about that. I want to see you dancing with your kids. All right, mate. Well, listen, we're going to be back for part 2 of this delicious conversation very soon. So stay with us. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious. We're going to be back for part 2 of our delicious conversation with Scott Jeffrey Miller in one click.